The warm summer evening casts long shadows across Washington Square Park in New York City. Street musicians fill the air with jazz melodies while students, tourists, and locals mingle under the fading sunlight. The iconic Washington Square Arch stands majestically against the darkening sky, a testament to human achievement and persistence. At a corner cafe overlooking the park, a peculiar temporal anomaly has occurred. Two figures from vastly different eras sit across from each other at a small wooden table, seemingly unnoticed by the bustling crowd around them. On one side sits Simone de Beauvoir, her dark hair pulled back in her characteristic style, her intense gaze surveying the scene with curiosity. Her fingers, accustomed to the typewriters of mid-20th century Paris, tap rhythmically against her coffee cup. Across from her sits an elderly man with a long beard and traditional Chinese robes. Master Kong, known to the Western world as Confucius, observes the modern surroundings with a mixture of confusion and contemplation. His weathered hands, which once wrote teachings that would guide Chinese civilization for millennia, now rest calmly on the table. The narrator's voice emerges, smooth and omniscient. What happens when two philosophical giants, separated by 25 centuries and opposing worldviews, find themselves sharing a conversation? Tonight, we witness the impossible debate between Simone de Beauvoir, the revolutionary feminist philosopher who challenged gender norms in the 20th century, and Confucius, the ancient Chinese sage whose teachings on social hierarchy have influenced Eastern thought for over 2,000 years. Beauvoir lifts her coffee cup to her lips, her eyes never leaving the elderly sage. So, Master Kong, I understand your teachings have shaped the lives of countless women across East Asia for millennia. I wonder if you realize the constraints your philosophy has placed upon half of humanity. Confucius smiles gently, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Madame de Beauvoir, I see you speak directly without restraint. In my time, we valued harmony above confrontation. But I welcome this exchange. He pauses, considering his words. The constraints you mention were never intended as chains, but as threads in the fabric of a harmonious society. Beauvoir leans forward, her passion evident in her voice. But harmony for whom? For men, certainly. The women in your ideal society are subservient first to their fathers, then their husbands, and finally their sons. They exist only in relation to the men in their lives. They are never themselves. You misunderstand, Confucius replies, his tone patient but firm. Every person in society has responsibilities according to their position. Men too have obligations to their rulers, their parents, their children. The wise ruler treats his subjects as his children. The father provides for his family. The husband protects his wife. Beauvoir scoffs, setting down her cup with more force than necessary. Protection is often just another word for control. Your system assumes women need protection rather than freedom, that they must be guided rather than allowed to guide themselves. The park around them grows quieter as evening deepens. The cafe lights create a warm glow around their table, isolating them in a bubble of philosophical tension. Confucius observes a young couple walking hand in hand through the park. Tell me, in your ideal world where women are completely free from traditional roles, do you see greater harmony or greater chaos? Do families flourish or fracture? The question itself reveals your bias, Beauvoir counters. You equate traditional hierarchy with harmony and assume that equality must lead to chaos. But I have seen the opposite. When women are imprisoned by rigid roles, they suffocate. Their potential, their very humanity, is denied. The narrator's voice returns. Two worldviews collide as night falls over Manhattan, one shaped by ancient traditions that emphasized order and defined roles, the other forged in the fires of 20th century existentialism that demanded freedom and authentic choice. As our philosophers settle into their debate, they begin to explore the fundamental question: how should society view women, as defined by their relationships and duties, or as independent beings with the freedom to determine their own essence? Confucius sips his tea thoughtfully before responding. Perhaps we should begin by discussing what makes a virtuous society. In my view, when each person understands and fulfills their proper role, harmony prevails. The family is the foundation of the state, and within the family each member has responsibilities. And there lies our fundamental disagreement, Beauvoir says, her eyes flashing with intensity. I do not believe in proper roles determined by one's sex. When you define women primarily through their relationships to men, as daughters, wives, and mothers, you deny them the chance to define themselves through their own actions and choices. The first stars appear in the sky above Washington Square Park as these two intellectual giants prepare to dive deeper into their conflicting visions of women's place in society and morality, a conversation that will challenge assumptions, explore cultural differences and perhaps find unexpected common ground. The cafe has grown quieter now as the evening crowd thins. Their table, tucked in a corner beneath vintage photographs of New York landmarks, feels increasingly isolated from the modern world. A server refills their cups, espresso for Beauvoir, green tea for Confucius, and retreats, seemingly unaware of the historical significance of the customers she serves. Beauvoir breaks the momentary silence. "You speak of roles as if they were natural, Master Kong, but that is precisely what I challenged in my work. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. The qualities you attribute to women, passivity, nurturance, submission, these are not biological destinies, but social constructions." Confucius strokes his beard thoughtfully. "Nature provides us with patterns that wise governance should follow. The relationship between man and woman mirrors the relationship between heaven and earth. Heaven takes the initiative, earth responds. This is not a matter of inferiority, but of complementary functions." Complementary? Beauvoir raises an eyebrow. "A convenient word that has justified inequality for centuries. Tell me, why must woman always be the one who responds rather than initiates? Why must she always be defined in relation to man, while man is defined in relation to the world?" The narrator interjects. "Here we see the collision of ancient cosmology with modern existentialism. For Confucius, the natural order revealed eternal principles that should guide human arrangements. For Beauvoir, appeals to nature were often masks for cultural prejudice and tools of oppression." Confucius watches a family pass by the cafe window, parents walking slowly while their child runs ahead, then circles back. "Look at this family. The father stands tall, protective. The mother reaches for the child's hand. These patterns repeat across time and culture. Should we dismiss them as mere constructions?" Beauvoir follows his gaze. "What I see is more complex. I see two adults who have been shaped by expectations since birth. The woman reaches for the child because society has taught her that childcare is primarily her responsibility. Had she been raised differently, perhaps the man would be the one more attuned to the child's needs." "You believe such traits are entirely learned?" Confucius asks. "I believe that social conditioning runs so deep that we cannot separate what might be natural from what has been ingrained," Beauvoir responds. "From the moment a child is born, we wrap them in blue or pink. We give boys trucks and girls dolls. We praise boys for assertiveness and girls for compliance. Then we claim the resulting differences are natural." Confucius nods slowly. "There is wisdom in what you say about the power of cultivation. Indeed, I taught that proper education was essential for developing virtue. But I wonder if you dismiss too readily the patterns that persist across diverse societies." "Those patterns persist because patriarchy persists," Beauvoir says firmly. "When women have been subordinated in nearly every culture throughout history, similar justifications emerge. The consistency of oppression does not make it natural." The narrator's voice returns. "Two philosophers from vastly different worlds find themselves discussing a question that continues to provoke debate even in our time. How much of gender is nature? How much nurture?" For Confucius, living in ancient China with its emphasis on cosmic harmony, certain distinctions between men and women reflected the natural order. For Beauvoir, writing after Freud, Marx, and 2 world wars had shaken traditional certainties, such claims about nature often concealed social power structures. Confucius places his hands flat on the table. "Let us consider motherhood. The ability to bear children shapes a woman's perspective and virtues. This is not merely cultural, but biological reality. Motherhood is indeed a unique female capacity," Beauvoir concedes. "But we err when we make it woman's essential purpose or destiny. Men have used women's reproductive function to confine them to the domestic sphere, to justify excluding them from education, politics, and public life. The domestic sphere is not a prison, but the foundation of civilization," Confucius counters. "In my teaching, the family is the first school of virtue. A mother who raises children with wisdom and compassion performs a service to society no less valuable than the statesman or scholar." Beauvoir leans forward, her voice passionate but measured. "Of course, child-rearing is valuable, but why should it fall primarily to women? Why should women's options be limited while men move freely between domestic and public realms? And what of women who choose not to become mothers? Are they somehow deficient or incomplete?" Confucius appears momentarily perplexed by this question. "In my time, continuing the family line was considered among the highest duties. A woman who rejected motherhood would have been seen as rejecting her contribution to society's continuity. And therein lies the problem," Beauvoir says. Women were valued primarily for their reproductive capacity rather than their unique talents, intellect, or character. They were means to an end, vessels for continuing male lineages, rather than ends in themselves. The night deepens around them as their conversation intensifies, two worldviews separated by millennia, attempting to find common language to discuss questions that remain unresolved even in contemporary society. Outside the cafe window, the New York night has fully descended. The park is now illuminated by street lamps that cast pools of light on empty benches and winding paths. Inside, the barista begins closing procedures, but somehow leaves the philosophical pair undisturbed in their corner, as if sensing the importance of their dialogue. Confucius adjusts his traditional robe and looks directly at Beauvoir. "You speak much of freedom, madame, but I wonder if you have considered that true freedom comes not from absence of responsibility, but from embracing one's proper duties. The woman who fulfills her role as mother and wife with excellence achieves virtue." Beauvoir taps her fingers against the wooden table. "And here we reach the heart of our disagreement about morality. You believe virtue comes from conforming to predetermined roles. I believe it comes from authentic choice, from determining one's own essence through action. A woman who becomes a mother only because society expects it of her is not exercising moral freedom." The narrator's voice emerges. Now their debate turns to questions of ethics and responsibility. For Confucius, morality was inseparable from one's position in the social hierarchy. For Beauvoir, influenced by existentialism, moral authenticity required freedom from imposed definitions. "Let me ask you this," Confucius says. "In your vision of society, where women cast aside traditional roles, who ensures the continuation of cultural values? Who tends to the young and honors the elderly? These tasks have traditionally fallen to women as keepers of family ritual and relationship. Why should preserving culture be primarily women's responsibility?" Beauvoir challenges. "Men are equally capable of nurturing children and caring for the elderly. When we divide these responsibilities more equitably, both men and women can participate in cultural continuation while also pursuing their individual potentials." Confucius sips his tea. "You speak of potential as if it exists independent of relationships. In my philosophy, the self is realized through connection. Son to father, wife to husband, subject to ruler. We become fully human through fulfilling our relational duties. But these relationships you describe are hierarchical," Beauvoir points out. "The father commands the son, the husband directs the wife, the ruler governs the subject. True human connection requires mutuality, equal recognition of the other's freedom and subjectivity," the narrator observes. Here we see a fundamental tension between Confucian emphasis on vertical relationships that maintain social order and Beauvoir's insistence on horizontal relationships of mutual recognition. Their debate reflects different understandings of human flourishing, one rooted in harmony through hierarchy, the other in authenticity through equality. Confucius looks thoughtful. "Perhaps our disagreement stems from different understandings of human nature. I taught that people require guidance and structure to cultivate virtue. Left to follow their impulses without the restraint of tradition, they become selfish and society fractures. And yet," Beauvoir counters, "the traditions you champion were created by men to serve male interests. Women were rarely consulted in establishing the customs that governed their lives. Is it truly selfish for women to question arrangements that systematically disadvantage them? You mistake the purpose of tradition," Confucius replies. "These customs were not designed to oppress women, but to create stable families in which all members could flourish. The wife who manages household affairs holds great influence, even if her authority operates in a different sphere from her husband's." Beauvoir sighs. "The separate spheres argument has long been used to exclude women from power while pretending to honor them. Real equality cannot exist when one sphere consistently commands more resources, recognition, and freedom than the other." A distant siren wails somewhere in the city, momentarily drawing their attention to the window. The modern world continues its relentless pace outside their philosophical bubble. "What troubles me about your position," Confucius says after a moment, "is its potential to undermine the family. When both men and women pursue individual fulfillment above all else, who ensures the needs of children and community are met? Does your freedom not come at a cost to social cohesion?" "The family need not be destroyed to be transformed," Beauvoir responds. "Indeed, families are stronger when built on mutual respect rather than authority and submission. Children benefit from seeing parents who relate as equals, who both nurture and both provide. Your concern assumes women's equality must come at the expense of children's well-being," but evidence suggests the opposite. The narrator's voice returns. As their debate deepens, both philosophers confront the practical implications of their moral visions. How does a society balance individual freedom with collective harmony? Can family structures evolve without losing their nurturing function? These questions, which troubled Beauvoir in the 20th century and would have perplexed Confucius in ancient China, remain unresolved in our own time. The night grows later, but neither philosopher shows signs of tiring as they continue their exploration of how women should be situated within moral and social frameworks. Midnight approaches. The cafe has officially closed, but the philosophical pair remains, suspended in their temporal anomaly. Through the windows, they can see the emptiness of Washington Square Park, occasionally crossed by late-night wanderers or students returning from libraries. The narrator speaks softly. As their extraordinary encounter nears its conclusion, our philosophers find themselves searching for points of connection across the vast divides of culture and time. Despite their profound disagreements, both Beauvoir and Confucius sought to understand the human condition and improve society. Could there be unexpected convergences in their thinking? Beauvoir brushes a strand of hair from her face. Master Kong, while we disagree on much, I wonder if we might find common ground in our concern for human dignity. Though your understanding of it differs from mine, you too believe that social arrangements should allow people to live with meaning and purpose. Confucius inclines his head slightly. Indeed, the purpose of ritual and proper relationships was never oppression but the creation of a society in which each person could develop virtue and contribute to the greater good. Perhaps we share more than initially appeared. I have studied your teachings, Beauvoir admits. While I reject the rigid hierarchy they often entail, I appreciate your emphasis on education and moral development for all, even if, in practice, formal education was mostly reserved for men in your time. Had you lived in ancient China, Confucius replies with unexpected warmth, I suspect you would have been among those remarkable women who achieved great learning despite the limitations of the age. Several of my female descendants became respected scholars, you know. Beauvoir smiles. And had you lived in 20th century Europe, perhaps you would have recognized how social conditions had changed sufficiently to require new understandings of gender and morality. The narrator observes, here we glimpse a profound truth about philosophy itself, that no thinker exists outside history. Confucius responded to the chaos of the Warring States period with an emphasis on order and hierarchy. Beauvoir wrote after 2 world wars had shattered old certainties, and women had proven their capabilities beyond the domestic sphere. Confucius gazes at his reflection in his teacup. There is a concept in my teaching, Ren, often translated as humaneness or benevolence. It encompasses compassion for others and recognition of their humanity. Perhaps in this we find common cause, though we might apply it differently. Yes, Beauvoir nods. My existentialism demands that we recognize the freedom and subjectivity of others, that we treat them never merely as means but always as ends in themselves. This recognition must extend to women as fully human, not defined merely by their usefulness to men or society. I taught that the family was a model for all relationships, Confucius offers. When I spoke of filial piety and respect between husband and wife, I sought to create patterns of mutual consideration that would extend outward to the community and state. The principle is admirable, Beauvoir acknowledges, but true mutuality requires equality. What I have fought for is not the destruction of family bonds, but their transformation from relationships of dominance and submission to partnerships of mutual recognition. Outside, the faintest hint of dawn appears on the eastern horizon. Their time together is drawing to a close. The narrator speaks. As morning approaches, our philosophers face the limits of their extraordinary dialogue. Neither has fully converted the other, yet both have been challenged to articulate and defend their deepest convictions about women, society, and morality. Confucius rises from his chair, his movements deliberate and dignified. Madame de Beauvoir, our conversation has given me much to contemplate. While I maintain that social harmony requires clear roles and responsibilities, I begin to see that these need not be as rigid as my followers sometimes interpreted them. Beauvoir stands as well, extending her hand in a gesture that would have been unfamiliar in ancient China. And I, Master Kong, still believe that women must be free to define themselves beyond traditional expectations. Yet I better understand your concern for the social fabric that binds us together. Confucius, after a moment's hesitation, takes her offered hand. Perhaps the wisdom lies not in choosing between tradition and freedom, but in finding how they might complement each other. The tree needs both roots and branches, stability and growth. A poetic sentiment, Beauvoir says with a smile, though I would add that new growth often requires pruning old branches that no longer serve the tree's flourishing. The narrator's voice rises as the scene begins to fade. Their debate, impossible in reality yet imaginable in our minds, reminds us that questions about gender, morality, and society remain unresolved. From ancient China to modern America, from traditional hierarchies to revolutionary equality, humans continue to search for arrangements that honor both our connections to others and our freedom to become ourselves. As the first rays of sunlight touch Washington Square Park, the philosophical pair begins to shimmer and fade, returning to their respective times and places in history. Their conversation, bridging 25 centuries east and west, tradition and revolution, leaves behind questions that continue to challenge us. How do we balance individual freedom with social responsibility? How do we honor difference without justifying inequality? And how might we create a world where all people, regardless of gender, can develop their full humanity? The cafe stands empty now. 2 cups on a corner table, the only evidence of the extraordinary encounter between 2 of history's greatest minds. An encounter that never happened, yet in some way happens continuously as we engage with the ideas they left behind.